wait, you did like list when you had like you could create the shapes. But once you did like list,
Welcome to server-side program. I hope everybody is keeping calm. I'm gonna take the teeth out though.
Yeah, no,
That's just gonna be painful to listen to.
Yeah. No, just that.
Yeah. That's true. I might injure myself.
You both have a mark for
So.
marks.
Sir, did you just want me to have more material for the next
The meme compilation?
the next Nicholas Moore without context calculation?
I mean,
So
yes? What?
he lost half a mark, and the description on where he lost the marks for one of his assignments in .NET is because he got full marks.
What?
Wait,
it
what?
said, like, the rubric that I got was 1.5 out of 2, and the comment under it was full marks.
I think the professor's on drawing.
I got higher than he did, and my program didn't even like output anything.
on which.
Mine was perfect. It's just because I
Please
put it
switch
once
it,
and
no.
he was like, no.
I am terribly sorry that happened, but perhaps we should persist with today's talk, okay?
But he put it in his own wording, so
Overview about
I can't complain.
Oh yeah, we're totally gonna, actually, so, yesterday I did a reasonably long, in-depth example where there's this, so it should be working. If you go to CS Unix, go to my drive, you'll find a working copy of this code. Basically, the code leaves a cookie on the computer of anybody who visits the site. The cookie is like, I had to sort of kludge together just integer at the last minute because I was missing a key part. But basically, it keeps separate visited, it tracks separately everybody, all of these IDs that are visiting the server. So, csunix.moha college.ca more, that's the tilde, right? F2023 slash, I think this is section 9, yes, cookies. No, wait,
Did you actually post
cookies.
this?
Yeah, I did, it's in the announcements feed.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Let's see here.
Section 9.
Yeah, you guys are section 9, right?
I know how to.
I just need Cuddy to check what the name of the script was. Unless anybody remembers it. Might as well make that an SCD. Oh, this mouse is terrible. Okay. I'm going to file a ticket. Have that mouse replaced. Alright. So basically, if a user that doesn't have a cookie of a particular name visits the site, they are issued a cookie with a unique identifying serial number. If a user accesses the website with that unique identifying serial number in a cookie that is automatically sent, then basically we're just keeping a plain text file with an associative array between the ID numbers and number of site visits. This way, we get to track the number of times any specific user has visited the website. Although we don't know anything else about the user, certain things about the user can be gleaned from the HTTP packet. A surprising amount of things, like for example, what country they are from, what the browser they're using is, all of this kind of, if you have it, has anybody actually looked at like a Google Analytics page? You'll find a lot of this type of stuff is commonly reported in these types of analytics pages, like, what part of the world someone's from is always fun to look at because you can do it on a map. But yes. log in. Yeah. It's no all site count cookies.php. There we go. Site count cookies.php. Found that now. Uh-oh.
Trying to squeeze it as much as
Did I misspell it or something?
apparently.
Oh, no, that's, oh, maybe it's for this better. So,
Oh, yeah, file not found.
yeah, it's probably not finding the file it's looking for. So, settings, select font, blow it up to like 20. Now, man, this mouse is going to give me problems. I already hate it. Alright, so this is like WinSCP's built-in little editor, right? So, we're getting a file not found, right? Maybe I rename it to something simpler. Site.php. Cancel. Okay. Alright, let's try site.php. Oh, for God's sake. Why is Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Alright, there we go. So, at the moment, this file doesn't really do anything. Let me just quickly add a line where we say, you have visited this website. I guess it makes sense to use just regular ID in both places since we're going to need it later. There we go. Yes, you have visited, so visits at ID times. There we go. Now, reloading. You have visited this site 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. If I take a look at the contents, I can see a couple of you have visited the site already, some of you as many as 15 times, right? So let's quickly review all of this, all of these lines of code and see what it's actually doing in the browser as per review. Where is my marker? My goodness. So, it's okay, you can make fun of Romanians.
What do you mean we make fun of you? It's the same voice as the Monster Mash song.
Yes. Well, not quite. The Monster Mash guy does sound a little bit like aristocratic American in my estimation.
People who are
Like, yeah, like old, like, you know, the aristocratic American accent from like the 1930s, you know, type thing. But anyway, so when the client has a cookie, that cookie is sent. All relevant cookies, all cookies relevant to the current domain, are sent automatically with any HTTP request. There is no need to separately request cookies, right? So that's important to know. Welcome. So, is set allows us to see if a cookie with a particular ID name is present in the package of sent cookies. That is to say, this line tests to see if the client sent the cookie we're looking for. Now, with a lot of things, we've gotten away with not checking to see if the file actually exists when we've done file I/O, right? The server is controlled by us, so if a file doesn't exist, we can just make it exist, and then it just exists. But when you're talking about the client may or may not have the cookie. Again, one thing that everybody should do on a periodic basis, as sort of routine computer maintenance, is delete their browsing history and delete all their cookies. So, even a person who has visited your website before may or may not still have their cookie, right? So the cookie needs to be replaced if it's missing, or generated if it was never there in the first place. Fortunately, both of those are the same case. So, in this particular if statement, the else case is the generation of the new cookie. So, I generate a new ID number. In this case, I'm just literally generating random ID numbers. Last time in class, I tried using random byte, but it turned out I had to also convert that to hexadecimal in order for that to actually come through. It doesn't like all the special characters. So, bit right here, right? So, you know, for our purposes, numbers are fine. On the next line, this is the line where we actually set the cookie. Setting the cookie is, you know, very simple. That's it. The name of the cookie is a file name, technically, but, well, depending on how it's stored. But, you know, this name here is the same name that you look it up by using the cookie superglobal. So you're setting its name there. The value, most of the time, the things that we store in cookies are identification numbers. It's rarely the case that you would want to store real data on the client's machine. Most of the time, this was like an older way of doing things like saving a user's site preferences, right? These days, it's more common to, you know, to use the MVC model and simply issue the web page with the correct configuration based on, you know, the classic example is light mode versus dark mode, right? So, name of cookie. I look even more like a magician with this, don't I? Yeah. I'm supposed to be a vampire. I have the teeth.
Yeah, but the teeth is just a fancy Romanian vampire.
Yeah.
I think it's the top hat. It's giving off magician vibes.
See, you know what it was? I forgot to pick up hair gel, or else I would have like slicked the hair back. So
I would have done it.
This is the understudy for the hair gel. So
There's people
It's
who
all
may
right.
be watching the videos thinking, like people who are listening but not watching and thinking, what the hell am I listening
You gotta, it's like people.
you should watch the video.
No, they're gonna watch it, but they're gonna watch it like a day after, so their brains would have forgotten that Halloween happened. Like when you stumble on YouTube an April Fool's video like 2 days after, and you're
Yes.
like, what the hell is
to?
this?
Why the hell is this professor dressed as a
Why is he dressed like an old England magician?
Why is
Speaking
he
with a
why is he dressed like
Hollywood
British?
Romanian accent.
Why is he dressed like British?
You won't like our blood though.
So anyway, our next parameter is the expiry time of the cookie. It's always polite to set an expiry time for your cookie. Basically, people's systems get junked up hugely by all of these cookies that people never set an expiry time for, and you have to go, that's why you have to go in and delete them periodically. Question?
Yesterday, that the integer was, I think, 3,600 for seconds per minute. Now it's 36,000.
Yeah, so 3,600 is 1 hour in seconds.
Oh, 1.
36,000 is 10 hours in seconds. So, yeah, basically, this is in Unix epoch time. The time function will give you the current Unix epoch time, and then you just add however many seconds you want to add. You know, that's what your actual expiry is from the time of the creation of the cookie. Make sense? Good. Next, the directory that you wish to store the cookie in, saying root, it doesn't actually put it in root, it just says, yeah, fine, whatever. You want to make your cookie apply to a specific domain. So whatever domain your website is going to have, you should put that in there. And then these two parameters, they tell you, they're both security parameters. This one disallows access of the cookie from JavaScript, which prevents people from running scripts that change your cookies on you. As we saw yesterday, you can actually just go in the browser and change the cookie. And if you're just echoing cookie contents to the web page, which nobody should be doing any of that at this point, the cookie itself can also be a source of the cross-site scripting attack. So, another nefarious problems. Yes.
Why would you, or like in what situation would you want to set the location of the cookie instead of just like the root?
So, if you choose the default, then like Apache is configured by default to put, or no, I'm thinking of sessions. I know the answer if you were talking about sessions, but not cookies. Sorry. But we're going to talk about sessions today as well. And sessions are most often transmitted using cookies. So
you pretty much always just use root or whatever for that.
unless you have a reason not to, basically.
Okay.
So yeah. So in this case, we set the cookie upon initial visit, but we're not resetting the cookie, to like increment a counter or anything. That information is being kept on the server because potentially sensitive, right? Good. Does everybody think they understand how a cookie works? Mostly? Hopefully? Lilith? Even the tiniest smidge? Alright. I'm getting the non-committal head shake. So, let me show you how to look at your cookies. If you go to the Application tab of your inspector window, you will have cookies for CF Unix, and you can take a look at all of the data inside of them and all of the various parameters of them, but name and value are definitely the ones you'll be looking at mostly.
So wait, I go to application.
Let me show you again. You right click, inspect, click the arrows, application, click cookies, then the cookies for your domain, and there you have it. There is your data. You'll notice, if you take a look at pretty much any site, there are some cookies going on, right? And most of the time, you'll see that the values are basically identification numbers of various lengths, right? It's very rare that you would have anything other than this, really. Basically, while the ability to store real data exists for a cookie, there are a couple of reasons that you don't want to in most cases. Number one, all of the data that you store in the cookie increases the internet traffic, right? It increases the size of the packets, and that increases system load, right? So you want to keep the packets small. Number two, any of this data is fully exposed to the client, even if, 99.9% of end users have no idea what a cookie is, let alone how to look at them, right? You're not worried about 99.9% of users, you are worried about the 0.00001% of users that are hackers. That's who you're worried about, right? So, all of that data, hackers can see it. An identification number by itself is not, that's not vulnerability, right? In theory, you need the data on the server to be able to tell what that ID, what other data that ID is linked to. The ID itself is not useful or interesting to a hacker most of the time, right? Now, what is it? One way that a hacker could use cookies to perform malicious actions, if they take control of another client, right, by maybe executing some malicious JavaScript in it, they can replace this ID with one of their own making. And if this cookie validates a session, right, then what you end up with is a hacker has a session open, right, and gets some other user to log into their session, right? So rather than break into your account, this hacker has you break into their account without realizing. Then you enter your personal sensitive information and they yoink it with their regular account access privileges, right? So that's the type of way this can be manipulated. But, again, it kind of comes down to the user shouldn't click suspicious links, right? So, does that make sense so far? Good. So let's talk about cookies in a more general sense. I kind of just ignored completely the fact that we had a whole page on it, and I jumped directly into the demonstration. So please forgive me.
It's funny because yesterday we didn't even move the cursor from the opening from the top page.
Yeah. So we already know how to do set cookie, accessing cookies. So again, cookies are available using the cookie super global. The cookie super global operates pretty much almost exactly like the post or the get super global. A thing that you can do with cookies, since you're just sending a string, it is possible to encode JSON data and send that and store that in a cookie as well. But again, that might be putting too much information into the client. Typically, that data should be stored on the server, and the only thing the client should have is an ID that lets you look up their information securely, rather than rely on information they're sending you, right? Never trust the client. Question?
Is there a potential size limitations with cookies?
Probably. Let me see. So 4 kilobytes. That's actually pretty big. You can do a lot with 4 kilobytes.
You could write a game in it.
Yeah.
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 Bro, nothing.
Most Atari games are smaller than that. you know?
I was just joking with the do more. I was just joking.
Mm.
Don't do.
So there you go. Okay. Oh, here you go. While it may appear to be a strange joke, browsers do impose cookie limits, yes. A browser should be able to accept at least 300 cookies with a maximum size of, yes. Okay, so there's a limitation not only on the size of cookies, but the number of cookies. So nobody is allowed to have more than 300 cookies. I hope that's enough cookies for everyone.
I think that's the minimum.
Is that the minimum? Oh, is that like the system requirement? Yeah. Well, at any rate, there are rules, but at our scale, it's unlikely we're ever to hit any of them. You know? So, no unless. And I don't want you storing a bunch of consecutive data into separate cookies to get around the size limit either.
What about a bunch of if statements as well?
I mean, like in theory, because you can just send general strings, there's no reason you couldn't send like pieces of code, you know? But I don't know why you would, and you probably shouldn't.
Sarah, I'm adding your mama jokes in all of my cookies from now on.
Oh my god.
Yeah, just do an infinite loop of creating cookies.
Oh my god. Like, just leave a cookie on it and it's a yo mama joke, but like, don't ever use it and don't ever tell anybody it's there. It's just like if some programmer happens to be looking at the cookies on your site, they see a yo mama
Your
joke.
mama, yeah.
There you go.
And then your
Perfect.
site breaks
Your
if it's
mom
not
is
there.
Yes, exactly. Precisely. Anyway.
Your mama's so ugly. She got me to do a joke inside of one of my cookies.
That's a good check for hackers. Just like if they try to hack your site, they get a Yo Mama joke instead.
Perfect.
Perfect deterrent.
They get dumped.
Yeah.
You say your mom and then you put the
okay,
IP in the system 32 No, you give them a buzz like, let's play a game.
So, new cookies. Here we go.
It's Russian roulette.
So, deleting cookies. So we should talk about deleting cookies briefly.
Can we delete system 32?
Stop with the mean jokes. So there's no command to delete a cookie. The way that you delete the cookie is by setting an expiry, right? Then after the expiry, it's up to the client to delete their own cookie. So a number of things cookies are used for. We've talked about remembering user preferences and assigning, we've talked about tracking user activity. Like site count is like among the most basic forms of tracking user activity, but still like surprisingly still very interesting and useful information. Shopping carts and authentication. Authentication is best done using sessions. So we're going to talk about sessions in a little bit. So now let's talk about one of the most nefarious things on the internet, the third-party tracking cookie. So, not tracking cookie, tracking cookie. So, let's say, just for the sake of interest, that you want to run an advertisement website, right? This is, so, in order for, so this is the way that advertising works on the internet, right? Let's talk about the most basic form of advertising, which still exists, but was, also one of the first forms of advertising. Just an image. You click on the image, it takes you to the website being advertised, right? We all know this very well, all the way since the 90s. So, the question is, if you are running the site, which, if you're running the site that is being advertised, you owe money to people who have people follow the link on their website to yours. That's how internet advertising works, right? If you have an ad on your web page and somebody clicks that ad, yes, thank you, and actually travels to the other page, that is when you get money from your ad.
But like, we're not the ones who are actually giving them the money. It's you.
No. Yes. Just like YouTube. Yeah. YouTube is a slightly more sophisticated way of doing it. But yeah, that's like how the advertising model works, right? And like, there are various other ways to make money on the internet using ads. Like, sometimes a company will pay not just for like direct click-throughs, but also for like impressions, right? If you're advertising a new video game, you don't necessarily need someone to click on the link. If they just see the logo enough times, they'll buy the game. This is how advertising works, right? So, various other pieces of metadata about your browsing history can be used and monetized by ad companies. But here's the question, going back to our basic scenario, if user A clicks on an ad and travels to the advertised website, how does the advertised website know which website sent that user? Because that's how you make money, right?
How?
Yes, how?
Like, how do we know the users click the website? Cookies. Or
Cookies, yes. Yeah, how do we know where they came from? Let's say, let me just, where's my marker? All right. So let's say we have, I don't know, websites or circles, deal with it, right? So, advertising and advertise, right? If we have person A, right? If person A visits site B and clicks on the link and proceeds to site C, right? How do we know that that hit came from site B and not from site A?
Well, they're different sites.
Yeah, but for the purposes of the server, we have no idea, right? The only information the server has available is that which comes in the HTTP packet. You already said the answer, it's cookies. So basically, inside of the ad, there is a little, so the ad gives a cookie to the client, and the cookie says, I am site B, or something. In reality, this would be a unique identifying code, similar to all of the other unique ID codes that we've seen in all of the cookies so far, right? So, when the user visits site C, the cookie is given to site C, and the cookie contains the number which indicates which of the two advertising sites that link came from. Does that make sense? So that's how online advertising works. The issue here is that these three websites are also three different domains, right? So basically, in order to make this work, you have to write cookies that are accessible across many domains. That's why these are called third-party cookies, right? So in this this original transaction where B issues the cookie, party 1, party 2, party 3. You know, although B is issuing the cookie, the code which issues the cookie will often be taken from C's website, right? It will load third-party JavaScript code in order to do so because this guy has to know what the what the correct ID number to issue is, right? So it gets a little, yes, question?
So in this scenario, if user 1 blocks the third party cookies, what will happen?
If user 1 blocks third-party cookies, the visit to the advertised website, if they click the link, they come with no tracking cookie, which would be interpreted as just like a plain old regular hit on the website. So without third-party tracking cookies, B does not make any money from having their link clicked because there's no way to know that B was the one who had their link clicked. Yes?
If they go and click on website B and then they go and click on website A after, will it know which one is like the most recent one, or would it like kind of recognize both because you have both cookies?
So I believe how it works, how it would work is the cookie is issued at the point of clicking on the advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, if you click on the ad on both sites, for some reason.
Well, that would register as 2 separate hits to the same website with 2 different IDs, so both sites would get money.
Right. But with
Right.
the second time, like say you did A the second time, would B get 2 clicks? Because it's like, the cookie exists for B already?
So let's model, let's do this scenario, right? So 1 visits B,
Mm-hmm.
right? B issues cookie saying B, right?
Yeah.
Then proceeds to C. C reads the cookie. B gets 1 hit, right? Next, 1 visits A, clicks on link, right? A overwrites cookie, right? Because when you set a cookie, it overwrites the existing contents.
Got it.
Then follows through, A also gets 1, C tracks that both A and B have given them both a link and pays, you know, like 0.07 cents per click-through or some gosh darn unreasonable amount of money, right? But
So is it like someone could just spam click on the ad and they can make money?
C, no. You can, so if you just stop there, you would be able to do that. You would be able to like set up a bot. B could set up a bot that just continually clicked, click, 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 right? So that's not the only data that's being transferred to the advertising, to the advertised website, right? You would also have like unique user information, right? Like user ID numbers. You would have, you know, you would measure how frequently these clicks were happening, right? Like if you get 10,000 clicks 1 millisecond apart, all from the same IP address, right? That's easy enough to check for, right? And that's like this sort of cat and mouse game between the advertiser and the advertising, or the advertiser and the advertiser and the advertising sites is like, you know, it's a complicated subject, we don't have to get into the whole thing, but like, they've been playing this game for at least 30 years, right? So, yeah. Good. So that's how you would use a third-party cookie for advertising. You can also use tracking IDs to build up a profile on a particular user using a particular browser, right? And this is where things get even more nefarious. So, if you happen to be Google, and you have a bit of your code running on basically everyone's website, right? What Google can do is check for unique user IDs, check the individual websites that a user is visiting, check how things are being accessed, check a lot of different information that the user is producing, but not necessarily even realizing they're doing it, right? Over time, this can be used to build up a database about a particular user's behavior. You can use information in that data set in combination with data in the data sets of many other users. Think millions to maybe even billions of users, right? Because a user is not the same thing as a person necessarily, right? When you are on your computer and on your phone, you are two different users, right? So you take all of these, all of this information that's been collected up using tracking cookies in your great big centralized database, then you train a machine learning model to predict what other sites a person would like to visit, or what other type of YouTube video would they like to watch, right? Or what other types of Twitter accounts they might be interested in following, right? And you build up a profile that, if you want the corporate doublespeak way of making this sound good, it's, oh, we're just tailoring the ads to people. We're tailoring and targeting it so that the ads are maximally relevant to the end user. Ads are a service and definitely not a nuisance, right? Ads improve your life. No. I heard a scary statistic that the average person these days are advertised to 10,000 times a day. Which that boggles my imagination. How could you even be advertised to 10,000 times a day?
I mean,
Does that include just like a billboard that you see when you're driving?
Yes.
oh, okay, so let's go to YouTube. Let's say
Yeah.
you open a 10-second video.
Mhm.
You have the lower banner that I haven't seen in years because I haven't
I've been
disabled
running an
ad block
blocker.
for 5 years. I don't know. I don't even know if the features I'm talking about are still there. But
Yeah, they still run banner ads.
they got banner ads. I'm pretty sure that sometimes they're some stuff can pop up in your side when you open the main page of YouTube.
Oh yeah.
You got at least three ads per video. One in the end, most likely, and two in the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's ads usually in the video because
That's how the
Paid
people making the
advertising.
video make money, because they can't really make much money off of the YouTube ads anymore.
because
Yeah.
somehow YouTube has doubled the amount of ads, but ad revenue is at an all-time low for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, all they have to do is squeeze the pipes, right?
It's like when you have the ad blocker on,
Yeah.
YouTube ad literally tells you to turn off the ad blocker so they can run the ad. Either you can watch the video.
My ad blocker.
Depends on how up to date your ad blocker is.
My ad blocker at the moment says it has blocked 120K ads.
Oh my goodness.
Like,
Which browser are you?
check.
Yeah, I gotta check now too, on my personal laptop, because I use the Brave browser, which has an ad blocker built in, so.
I have 128,000
What browser does everybody use?
Chrome.
Brave.
Brave? Awesome.
I still use Chrome.
Chrome, you should switch to Brave.
I know.
It's built on the Chromium base and it's faster than Chrome. You should. They'll import all your settings. But yeah, anyway. So, if anybody is wondering why the entirety of the human race is hurtling towards this current dystopian nightmare, this is a big contributor. So, in response to the end of humanity through advertising, basically various governments in various parts of the world are like slowly trying to pass some legislation to address some of the problems at some points. So let's just quickly review, because as web developers, it is important that you yourselves comply with all of these legal regulations. So on my personal laptop, right, 625,787 ads blocked, 7.03 gigabytes of bandwidth saved, and 8.7 hours saved. So use Brave. Ha!
You got it.
I'm not being paid by them. This is not an advertisement.
It's not an advertisement.
Wouldn't if it was, wouldn't that be like not legal to do in a classroom or something?
You don't think you're being advertised to in a classroom? What's on the computer you're using? Microsoft products. You know why they give, this is the oldest trick in the book, man. This is what you do. You give all kinds of free software to students, then when they graduate, they expect that software in industry. That's what they've been trained on. This is how Unix even became a popular operating system, is they made Unix basically free for educational institutions, and basically the first generation of programmers grew up on Linux, or Unix. Then they got greedy, and Unix was basically sold off, and the new people who owned it decided to start charging for it, which meant that all of these programmers who'd grown up on Unix were like, I'm not paying for an operating system, so they wrote their own, and that's where Linux comes from.
Matrix. Matrix.
Yeah, well, I have a theory that you actually don't have to, you don't need a war to get people into the pods. People will climb into the pods themselves if they're comfortable enough. That's what I think. But anyway, so let's go through some cookie legislation, shall we? General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, Comprehensive Data Protection Law in the European Union, came into effect in 2018, regulates the processing of personal data, including the use of cookies. Organizations must obtain clear and informed consent from users before placing non-essential cookies on their device, and users have the right to withdraw consent for cookies. So you know how a few years ago you started getting all these pop-ups about, do you consent to cookies? Do you consent to cookies? It's because it has to be there legally, right? And because this is how the internet works, basically, the law, the most restrictive law in any country that accesses the free internet, I'm not talking about places where the internet is heavily regulated and restricted.
Basically walled off from the rest of the world.
Walled off from the rest of the world, places like China and Iran, right? Where they don't have the open internet. But in countries that are part of the open internet, so to speak, basically as a web developer, you're an idiot if you don't play to the most restrictive version of whatever legislation there is in the entire world. Because the alternative to that is you have to offer different versions of your web page in each country. Right? Which, if you're a small company, you can't afford to do that. Right? if you're somebody like friggin', you know, Amazon, sure, you know, whatever. Google can do it, Apple can do it, any sufficiently, basically, if you're the type of company that has offices on most of the continents, then you're probably okay with respect to generating different versions of your website. But if you're like, you know, Joe Schmo, the entrepreneur who's just trying to make a buck, you know, basically you would be in violation of the law in some countries, but not in others, depending on how you configure cookies.
So you better fit the one that is most restrictive, if able,
Precisely,
that could actually damage your ability to make money.
precisely. Which is why the internet is like just not a fun place at the moment.
The internet is not a fun place.
No.
period.
Well, as like, if you're an independent person trying to make money on the internet right now, it's like, you know. Basically, the whole, like, and, you know, the other thing is, like, you know, if I wanted to get conspiratorial for a moment, a lot of this legislation has the backing of the large companies specifically because it inhibits the ability of smaller companies to challenge their market share, right? But anyway, so you've got European Union, you have to consent to cookies, California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, basically, very similar thing. It also requires businesses to disclose the types of personal information collected and what the cookies are used for. This is like the origin of where that blurb, this is what we're using the cookie for, that's where that comes from. California is not an insignificant territory when it comes to software development. Silicon Valley, exactly.
I groan whenever it's brought up. I suffer.
Oh.
It's just that I have a friend. I'll talk.
Yeah, later. E-Privacy Directive, also an European Union cookie law. The E-Privacy Directive is an EU law that governs the use of cookies and similar technologies. It requires websites to inform users about the use of cookies and obtain their consent. Many EU countries have also passed similar laws at their sort of national level. Children's Online Privacy Act. Basically, there are certain in some jurisdictions, the way that you advertise to children must differ from the way that you advertise to adults. You are not permitted, for example, to advertise alcohol to children. You're not allowed to have, like, you know, drunk Barbie and drunk Ken.
You're also
dolls.
not allowed to,
Yeah.
strictly speaking, be advertising. Like you cannot disguise advertisement as entertainment unless your Hasbro make Transformers.
Well, yeah.
Unless you're
Unless you're a big enough company, then you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are various restrictions on the way that children specifically are you know, the problem, of course, with that, with a piece of legislation like that, is that a browser does not know the age of a person that's using it, right? It's not like they're taking a photograph of the face and, like, you know, doing facial recognition analysis to try to guess the age. That's not. Does the phone do that now?
No, pretty sure
Probably.
someone did that at some point and got in real trouble. I don't remember who that was.
I'm sure they got in trouble. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
Um,
Huawei was one of them.
Hmm?
I know Huawei was one of them.
Oh yeah, Huawei.
Yeah, Huawei.
Yeah.
Google was, I think, the first to just straight up ban them.
Yeah. Yep.
But they can still use VPN, so
Yeah, exactly. Like, this stuff is, like, even if you, basically, the client can't be trusted. Again, the client can't be trusted. You know, I'm sure that nobody in this room, when they were like a 10-year-old, didn't, like, say, when they had like a pop-up, "Are you over 16?" didn't say, "Oh yeah, I'm over 16." You know,
Basically, everyone in this room has social media.
yeah.
Or had social media at 12 when most websites says you must be an adult.
Precisely. So, like, So this is where we run against like the law's ability to enforce things, right? But yeah, so basically, Children's Online Privacy Act, in theory, children deserve greater protection, but like friggin' good luck, man. Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, so the PIPEDA. This is actually a Canadian privacy law that governs the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information. It requires organizations to obtain meaningful consent for the collection and use of personal information, which includes cookies. So, you know when you probably when you guys registered for college, you had a form that you had to fill out that was like, I consent to the use of my personal information, right? Maybe some of you remember something like that. Yeah, that's where it comes from. That piece of legislation. So, question?
Yeah. So it's a silly question.
Mhm.
So how much secure your system has to be over the internet if you are accessing the dark web?
You're only in trouble if you get caught.
That's just laws in general.
Yeah.
That's just laws.
So, like, in general, so, like, there are lots of these little considerations that you must consider. Generally speaking, like, if you're part of a startup or something like that, you will develop your prototype, and then one of the things you'll do is you'll bring in, like, some person who knows this legislation, and then your website will be made compliant with the legislation before its user base gets too big, right? That's how this sort of thing generally goes. If you're joining an existing company, then you don't have to worry. They probably already have a lawyer or two, right? But this is kind of,
Or you do worry about it.
yeah, or you just take your chances. But yeah, this is basically, for the purposes of this video, I do not condone, I am not expressing any condoning of breaking the law in any way, shape, or form. Always obey all of the laws applicable in your country, region, or state, or...
You may want to put an age restriction on this video.
Yes, actually, I kind of do.
Really?
Yeah, when I upload, like, one of the things you do when you upload a video to YouTube is you have to say, is this video made for children?
Yeah.
And I always say, no.
Age restriction, I think no
Got it.
longer exists as age restriction as we knew it.
Yeah.
It's just restriction if there's like gore or like really
Oh,
disturbing
so-
stuff.
Oh, there's a lot of categories actually.
There's
Yeah.
oh wow.
Like,
back
YouTube has
back
very
in
strict
my
guidelines.
day, they used it to be only like, is it this app
Man.
for?
There are like 12 categories of things. Yeah, I can show you sometime.
Oh.
I can try to upload I can upload a video to YouTube and I can show you all the categories.
Okay,
but,
okay, okay.
um, For this yeah, I'd like to move on
Yeah,
and
let's
get
go
to,
back.
to
Let's go.
sessions. So, non-compliance with these laws can result in fines and legal consequences. Legal consequences. So, it's crucial for organizations to be aware of the laws and to apply them, and to implement cookie management practices which respect the user's rights and privileges in the jurisdictions that they apply to. So, yeah. Any questions about cookies?
Not for now.
Sorry?
Not for now.
Not for now? Okay, good. So let's talk about sessions. So, this is how a session works. Quick summary. When you establish a session, you give yourself access to a new superglobal called sessions, or called session, where you can store data and retrieve data, right? I'll do it with a diagram. So, basically what a session is used for most of the time is like a login session, right? So let's say we have the client, right? And then we have the server, B, right? And then we have Fred the programmer. So, he's going to wear a top hat because I'm wearing a top hat. Very good. So, sessions do not need to be checked with like login validation, right? It's not necessarily like, it might be a good idea, like it's definitely a good idea depending on what type of website you're making, but you don't need to validate login credentials in order to start a session, right? So let's just do like a basic session. So user uses client to log into my web page. Step 1. Step 2, the server starts a session, right? I'm going to talk about cookie-based sessions, but you don't necessarily just have to use cookie-based sessions. These can also be, you can also have like versions that use something like get and post parameters, right? Yeah, that kind of a mechanism. So, server issues cookie to client, right? Cookie has ID number. At the same time, server has a database where ID number is stored, right? Any information you want to store for the session is not being sent to the client. It's being stored somewhere inside of your server's hardware system, right? So somewhere inside of the PHP folders, the PHP installation directory, there will be a folder that's being used to keep track of the data for active sessions, right? So once you have a session established, the session's superglobal acts just like an associative array. So you can assign things to it as you would a normal associative array. You can read stuff out of it just like the way you would anything else. The difference is, so long as this session cookie is not deleted by the client, this data is persistent, right? It keeps the session data on the server. So basically, pretty much everything we've done so far with file I/O could be done with a session instead. Now, some people think that, because session data is often held in like one directory of a server, it's a common place for hackers to look, as opposed to like individual folders for users that you might have a system more like CS Unix, right? But basically, in order to crack your database of sessions, a potential hacker would need to have shell access to your server. And let me tell you, my friend, if a hacker has shell access to your server, that is end game. You are done, you are finished, there is no recovery.
At
It
that
is
point,
game over.
at that point, like that's the least of your worries.
Yes, yeah, exactly. You know, they're in the position where they could literally copy out your entire database, right? Depending on how big it is, of course. So, session ID stored in cookie on client, session data stored on server in one of the PHP directories. You might be able to make it slightly more secure by configuring which directory you want to put it in, you know, but you know, try to make it less guessable. But you know, again, once you've lost root access, there's no, it's the end of the world. So, good. Sessions are actually super easy to use. A demonstration is not going to take very long. Basically, the session takes care of a lot of the work. That we did manually with cookies just by itself, right? So, but there are like one or two gotchas. I'm going to make a new thing here. Let's new file sessions.php, right? Oh, here's a question. At a guess, what do you think stops a session?
Closing the website.
Closing the tab,
Yeah.
right?
Or like logging out.
Logging out, definitely.
Closing the browser.
Closing the browser, yeah. So most of the time, the cookie will, like these cookies, it depends slightly on which browser you're using, but the cookie will be set to be deleted once the memory has been liberated from that instance of the browser, right? So these cookies are not being stored on the hard disk. They're being stored in RAM, not on ROM, right? So when the application closes, the cookie will be deleted along with all the other RAM information that program is using. Yes?
I'm not sure if you went over this already, but is the session initiated by the server or the client?
It's initiated by the server.
Oh.
I'll show you how to initiate a session right now. So you use the same command to either start a new session or continue an old one.
So when you
Sure, you have no idea how much.
when you close the browser, does that mean your client is initiating like an end session call to the server?
No. What it means is the tracking cookie won't be found, so it won't link up to the session data. So it will. So when you run the start session command, if a cookie, if the PHP session cookie exists, it will use that ID to look up the existing data. If that cookie does not exist, it will generate a new one and start a new entry for you. Like if you have old session data, right? That the client lost their cookie and they're trying to get back their old session data. Not going to happen because like the ID basically functions as an encryption key. Like it functions as like a hash key, right? Like you can't get to the session data without that ID number. So because the ID number is lost, the session data is also lost.
Do they usually have a time expiry on the session?
Yeah, if they're not renewed every I'm sure it's configurable somewhere. But yeah, like this stuff is garbage collected every once in a while. So yeah. So let's do a session. Start
So it's like
session.
when you open a website, you are not logged in, but it's still gonna start the session.
Yes. So so if you wanted to add let's do the basic version and then we'll talk about logging in, Okay?
Sessions exist regardless of being logged in. They're just a way to record who gets into the website and who doesn't, what system enters and what system isn't.
Well, it's not really used to like validate information. All it,
It's-
literally all that this session does is our example from last week with fewer lines of code. Or from last class with fewer lines of code. Yes?
All Chrome browsers have a UID, so essentially the only thing that session is recording is which UIDs have visited tops. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that already.
So, except it would be the server issuing the ID number.
Oh,
Right? Sometimes, well, maybe. Not all browsers are Chrome, right?
oh,
You gotta build it for all browsers.
you're right, sorry.
So,
I think it's session start.
session. Oh, is it session start? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Sorry. Session start. So, here's a gotcha. This session start information must be the very first thing which is sent by the server. So you must, if you're going to start your session, you can't echo anything before that, and you can't have anything above the opening PHP tag, right? And nothing that would be printed anyways. Hello.
Can you
So.
have comments there then?
Hmm?
Would comments be okay?
Yeah, any whatever it is, it just has to not render in HTML, right? I think.
So it's like every PHP file you have in your project, you need a session start in the first line of the code.
Basically, yeah. Just put the session start right at the top. You can even put it inside of its own. You can put it inside of its own PHP tag and the tag, and then continue later on. So basically, you would have session start, right? Then you would say, HTML, all this kind of stuff. Right? Yeah, so basically just put it right at the top. There are reasons, you don't necessarily even need to know the reasons, so long as you do that consistently. Right? Sound good? Thank you. So, where was it? Yes, sessions. So basically, so long as you have session start, which has been included at the top, you have access to the sessions superglobal. It is an associative array that will be re-given to you so long as every page that loads also starts the session or continues the session, right? So, for example, I might say something like if is set session at visits, there we go. Then session at visits plus. Else, does anybody remember how we add a new element to an associative array? I will just be disappointed if nobody knows because it was on the test.
Array push.
We could do array push,
Wait,
yes.
sorry, say again?
How do we add a new element to an associative array? Array push is antiquated.
You just force add it in since it's
Just
just a
assign to it.
Oh.
Yep. Session visits is equal to 1. You have visited this site. Echo that. we go to, where am I? Sessions.php. There we go. You have visited this site one time. In this session. 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, etc. Right? So the values in this super global are being maintained between page loads, but you can see how easy that is? Like, we don't have to fiddle around with file I/O, we don't have to worry about much. And you have the added benefit, because that information is being stored securely on the server, so long as you aren't being stupid and saving user input values into it, right? You can basically trust it the same way you would trust any of your local variables. Right? Because it's being stored via a secure mechanism. Again, your own local variables can't be trusted if you're, putting unsanitized user input into them. So, yeah, it's like, don't trust the client, don't trust files on the server, don't trust incoming request values.
Don't trust anyone.
Don't trust anyone, but you can sometimes trust your session. Yeah. So, make sense? Now, let's close down the browser, open the browser back up again. Is that somebody's phone? CS Unix sessions.php, and you can see that the counter has been reset because our session ID has changed because we closed our browser down and lost the cookie. Do you guys want to see the cookie? You want to see the cookie?
Sure.
Okay, let's see the cookie.
Are you talking to us like we were
I'm just having fun today. Today is a day for fun.
Yeah, I wish.
So, there we go. So, you can see our user ID from the other one is still there, but, what's this? PHP ses ID. That should be like sesh with an H, I think, but, okay. So there you have it. PHP session ID as a cookie on your computer. Make sense? Good. Any questions? Yes.
Can you interact with that session ID? Like,
Sure.
pull it up? Like, what's the variable for that?
Oh, I would have, like, the client doesn't know that because it's on the server, right? And I wouldn't know where, but, well, we can dig around and see if we can find it, but I don't know if I'm allowed in there,
Or is it usually just better to make your own ID?
Are you talking about like the client, the client interacting with like the session information?
No, like PHP, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm in like Linux land now, and I don't know where I'm looking, so.
Yeah, whatever.
In something, like maybe in,
Is it like on the server you can just change that how many times user has actually interacted with the
PHPD?
website?
Yeah.
Is this what you're trying
Well,
It might be one of these, it might not, I don't know, and I'm not sure I care.
if it's done through a
long as
session
it's doing its
and you
job,
do
I
it on
don't
the
care.
server, if it's done through a cookie, then
Yeah,
you can still do it, but the cookie's on the client side.
to?
yeah,
But it is also stored on the server side.
yeah,
Some information about it is.
yeah. That's an important point, right? The cookie is only storing an identification number, which is necessary to look the data up is necessary for PHP to look up the data inside of its internal systems, right? The actual data itself is not being stored on the client. This is why the session data is secure data.
Oh,
Right.
so like the data that is stored on the database has actually your logged in info and everything, and it's tracking by the cookie ID on the client side.
Right. So, like for example, if I, like, let's say I reload this a few times, right? If I modify the value of my my session cookie, it's got to be lowercase probably. Hello. It'll probably complain that it's not the right length, but you know. Hopefully, it says, oh, this is invalid and deletes it. You'll see. Yep, it just destroyed. Oh, interesting. It now started a new session for hello. Wow, isn't that interesting? Interesting. But yeah, so, you know, basically the server is keeping a bunch of database entries for all of the stuff, and it is exposed very simply and easily in PHP as a super global, so it's like super uber convenient to use, and you don't even have to use filter input. Basic, long and the short of it. Make sense? Any questions? All right, so. Oh man, I closed Canvas. All right. Okay. So, another thing that will break the session is if any of the web pages which are loaded are HTML pages instead of PHP generated pages. That being said, you can also manage sessions using Ajax. One of the things that you can configure using Ajax requests is whether or not cookies should be sent along with the Ajax request. Obviously, if you're using cookie-based session management, you'll need to have cookies enabled on your Ajax requests in order to use sessions with Ajax requests, right? Yes? So, very roughly speaking, because we're going to get into this material more heavily, I imagine, when we start talking about databases and keeping like a real database instead of just a file on the server. Login, right? In theory, this would be a very useful mechanism for maintaining things like a shopping cart, right? Or, you know, any of a number of things. You can imagine lots of things you would do once logged in. A session would be handy, right? So, what is a login? Can anybody tell me? Yes.
It's a way to authorize or authenticate a user to allow them access into a website or a website.
Right. We are authenticating the user to allow them access into the website. But the question is, how?
So, basically, if a user wants to log in, and when they enter the credentials, the required credentials, and it's, and verifying, it's gonna check, database to see if it exists. If it doesn't, it'll say, well, the password's incorrect. If it does, then it'll tell the user that, like, it's correct, now you have access.
So, let's say it's just a standard username and password combo check, right? First of all, do you send passwords by post or get?
Post
Why?
on get will be in URL.
Yes, in GET, it would be in the URL and publicly exposed to everybody who viewed the packet, including man-in-the-middle attacks. So, we always use post requests for sending login information, right? So, what you do, you query your database to see if this username matches up to that password. So, so, you have a database, usernames and passwords, probably indexed by password, or probably indexed by username, right? You then, the database itself searches to find the entry corresponding to that username. It then looks up the corresponding password and checks your password to see if the two match. If that's the case, then it sends a Boolean, basically it'll send that information back to your PHP script to say login succeeded, login failed. Often you'll also get username not found. Username not found is sometimes, they used to do it more than they do now.
It's not best practice anymore.
It's not best practice anymore, right? Do you know why?
Because you're telling them what's in the database.
Precisely. So if you give the user this name, this email was not found in our database, that's information about the contents of your database, right? What's better practice these days is to simply just, pretend that it was a password problem, right? Authentication failed.
Like it's gonna allow you to input any email ever in existence, even if it's valid, but it will only fail once you lose a password and it doesn't find the connection.
Sorry, run that second part by me again.
Like it will allow you to put basically an email, but only tell you that it's something went wrong once it doesn't find any matching password.
Yeah, well, it will tell you something went wrong in two conditions. One, username not found. Two, passwords don't match, right? Both of those conditions will now output like authentication failure or some other thing, or if you're being sneaky, you claim the password was bad even if it wasn't the password that was bad, right? But authentication failure is a pretty general term that catches a lot. So that's what best practice is with respect to usernames and passwords at the moment. So yeah, basically you send a query to the database returns success or failure. If success, you start a session, right? If failure, you do not start the session. So, and this leads us into, you guys remember that example with the XSS attack that we were talking about, like way back before the break, with Mallory and the bad link in the email, right? Remember that a key component of the attack scheme in that scenario was that Mallory managed to use JavaScript to create a duplicate copy of a session validation cookie, right? So if you can duplicate the validation cookie, then you can plug it into someone else's client, like the hacker's client. Suddenly, the hacker has a live and valid session open for someone else's account, right? Because, you know, it's good practice to make sure that, you know, if you're receiving requests from two different, you know, IP addresses or whatever, that you shut her down and stop the session because you've detected malicious behavior, right? But, you know, that's active defense, not passive defense. People have to implement that, which means people sometimes forget to implement that, which means that's a possible vulnerability. Make sense? Is good, is not so good. Yeah? No questions? Good. So, yep. So, how do we end a session? Session destroy. We don't end sessions, we destroy them. We obliterate them, we make it as if they never were there in the first place.
Not like when you end the session, like session end,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's the polite way to end a session. Here, this would be like, all right, I'd like everybody to leave the room, please, because I'm setting fire to it. No, I would never do any damage to public property or company property of any type, kind, or shape or form. So, you can clear the session variable separately using session onset, but this doesn't this just clears the data this clears the data here. You still have a valid session. The session itself hasn't ended, right? So session destroy actually destroys the database entry for that ID, right? So when you click log out, you are destroying the session. That's what's being called. Make sense? So here's a horror story for a lovely Halloween afternoon. Why you might want to make sure that the user logs out, right? So let's imagine that you are working with Worst Bank, the worst bank in the world, which has the worst website. Let's say you have given some of your money to Worst Bank, right? You enter a session with their online banking platform, right? You perform your transactions or look at your accounts or do whatever it is that you do on your online banking, and then you go off to some other website without logging out, right? Let's assume that the session timeout has been set quite generously. And let's say that the next site that you visit is like, you know, suspicious.com's, you know, try to entrap you with appeals to your sex drive.php type thing, right? Because you'll find that that's like, a lot of these people try to rely on human beings' more base instincts to get them to click on a link, right? So you visit this malicious site, right? You're running who the hell knows what JavaScript, right? And that JavaScript is delicately picking through all of your cookies looking for PHP sessions, right? Nom 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 nom. Delicious cookies. If it finds a session cookie, it copies the session cookie, and what do session cookies have as one of their parameters? The domain they apply to, right? So, you don't even have to guess. You don't even have to guess what domain the cookie applies to. It says what domain it applies to. So, then your session cookie is stolen, someone else gets into your bank, using your own session that you didn't log out of, and goes on a holiday to Jamaica, right? And puts you in debt to do so. They don't just take the money that's there, they also take the money that's not there. So, crucial lesson, always, always, always log out of your online banking or anything that has any sensitive data whatsoever.
Is this a personal experience story or?
No. I'm a good citizen and I always log out of my banking. Yeah. No, this was just an elaborate hypothetical scenario.
Okay.
Yeah. It's totally possible though.
I'd suggest if you want to be super paranoid, anytime you have to do online banking, do it through a virtual box
Yeah?
on like a clean Linux machine.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Because like if you've got any viruses kicking around on your system that are watching your browser. Yeah. Very true. Of course I run Linux, so I don't get viruses.
I mean, if you do, whoever wrote it earned it.
Yeah. Good. So I just have a little bit left to talk about. So let's talk about session security. Again, if somebody manages to breach your sessions database, like you're in for a bad time anyways, Like if they've got access to this, they probably have access to more vital information. But there are certain things you can do to sort of mitigate risks. Yes, so this data in PHP is not encrypted. It is stored in plain text format, which means that anybody who can see the file can see all of the data for all of the active sessions. Of course, the big asterisk on that is, if somebody has root access to your server, you're done anyway, right? So, what's the worst scenario? But in theory, you can try hiding your where your session is being stored by modifying session save path. Yes. More control over your hosting environment means more responsibility on you to maintain it. So basically, if you want, you can dig into the settings and really change things up and that sort of thing. But the more of that you do, the more likely you are to be a sysadmin rather than a developer and programmer, right? Like, once you start talking about all of these mechanisms by which servers become configured, basically you're like, if that's the stuff that you really enjoy, you should have taken the networking stream, basically. Right? Like, server configuration, that's on their end, If you require advanced security in that way, you're probably going to need to hire someone who knows networking, right? Yes?
Is session and cookie encryption a thing?
Sorry, repeat your question.
Like, it seems like there's lots of vulnerabilities in session and cookies. Like, would encrypting it be a thing where they store the private key or public key on the server, and then the user stores the complementary key on their system?
And most likely it won't be symmetric or asymmetric encryption.
Sorry?
Most likely on the server side it won't be a symmetric or asymmetric encryption because you need actual public key and private key to decrypt it.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a cryptology.
Or is the session security not that big of a deal where there's no universal solution? It's just be safe with it.
Well, basically, anything past this dotted line you need shell access for anyway. like, PHP might not be encrypting its database of session information, but it's not publicly publishing it either, right? Like you need, like, basically only accounts on the server that have sudo access would have read privileges, right? So, you know, you've got like a really big, thick brick wall, and I know multiple redundancy in security is very important, but like, once they have root access, you know, good luck recovering anything, you know? You might have bigger problems than the currently running sessions, which is like all of the data ever, right? But, yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know, it seems like more encryption would be good, just sort of as a general rule, but you have to know how to configure it. So one of the ways you can make a session more secure is by making it last for less time. Session expiry, you can set session expiration and timeouts using session set cookie parameters. PHP has a default session timeout of 24 minutes. This might be a long time or it might not be a long time. It depends on your application. Session hijacking prevention. This is precisely the Mallory situation we were talking about. Use secure session configuration settings such as session cookies secure and session use strict mode and cookie HTTP only to mitigate risk from XSS attacks. Like if the session cookie cannot be accessed from JavaScript, that's good, right? It means it can't be scraped automatically. Regenerate session IDs periodically or after significant authentication events to prevent session fixation. So the other thing that you want to do is you want to change up your IDs reasonably frequently, right? How many people use GitHub? Have you noticed when you want to modify some of the settings on a repo, you have to re-log in? You have to like re-authenticate? Like if you want to add someone else to a collaborator on a private repo, they make you put your password in again. That's what they're doing, right? If you're modifying anything significant, you have to re-authenticate in case someone like snatched your session cookie in the short amount of time that you've been on GitHub, right? Make sense? Ideally, you change it every single time a page loaded, but you know. Good. So, do not rely on the IP address of the user when the session was started. This is an old-fashioned idea of how to validate a user. The fact is, most people browse the internet on cell phones these days. A cell phone might be switching between multiple Wi-Fi networks and a cellular data carrier. Each one of those is going to have a different IP address, right? So it is actually, these days, a perfectly valid situation. You should expect that the client will not have a consistent IP address. Make sense? So that's an old way of thinking when everybody's computer was an actual computer. These days, everybody's computer is a phone, and phones are a lot more mobile. Incidentally, the session regenerate ID function is what you use to refresh the session ID to a new one. So there you go. So, 5 points real quick. Best practices. 1, only store necessary data in sessions. 2, Sanitize and validate user input before using it in session variables. 3. Regularly clean up expired sessions using session garbage collection settings and session destroy. 4. Implement proper logout procedures to clear session data. And 5. Monitor session activity for irregularities. Any questions? Okay. Alright, happy Halloween, everyone.
You look fabulous, sir.
Oh, you didn't even see the fangs. I have fangs too.
I'm kinda happy you didn't do the entire class with the fangs.
Yeah, you didn't want to hear me lisp my way through this one?
Sounded a bit like Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
How is a vampire surviving in daylight?
Oh,
We're indoors.
I'm a daywalker.
You watch the Blade.